Hello, hello. Welcome to the stream. While we're waiting for players here, I'm OmegaRex, and we also have
bakadora.
bakadora.
We
And
consider, we consider ourselves two of the better players in the fish fry at OFC. Uh,
well, I don't know if
Important to
I
mention
would say
at OFC.
I don't know if I would say that about myself. I've certainly been destroyed a couple times on the OFC high seas, um, but I try to.
That's that's true for everybody. But you've played live OFC Cash at the WSOP, have you not?
Yes, in fact, that was the main reason I went for the last couple of years. Probably 3 or 4 years
Okay.
ago, I got introduced to it, and I fell in love with the game. It's just the best game. Um, Although we didn't call it OFC, we would always call it OFCP, where the P is for pineapple. Which,
Pineapple, yeah.
yeah, in the context of poker, pineapple's any game where you get three cards and throw one away and use two, so you can have pineapple hold'em as well. I've always loved.
Yeah, the original, sorry, the original version of OFC, you were dealt only one card a turn following your opening five, and the game
Yes,
is just a million times worse.
yes,
The hands
yes,
are worse.
exactly.
It's less strategic. It's less interesting to watch, and so I'm
Exactly.
glad that to play
But,
it
but
regularly.
the one benefit is that you can have in that version of the game, just open face Chinese, you can have 4 players. Um, in fact,
Sure.
I think that's why it was called Chinese poker, was because it's similar to mahjong in terms of the number of tiles and cards you have, and you
Oh,
have four
sure.
players around a table.
Oh,
That's
that's
how.
good. I guess you've got 13. Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny that you mentioned that because I played quite a bit of mahjong and gambled at it, played it at like reasonably high stakes. And one of the things I like to see is how mahjong like it is in that the game is always very active. You're never sitting there folding and waiting for the next hand to come. I mean, like you can be folding in mahjong or and in OFC, but you're basically like that's a tactical decision, kind of like starting a bomb, as opposed to just like clicking fold and waiting for the next thing to come. And you get paid based on the absolute strength of your hand. So there are a lot of times where you're presented with a sort of push or pull decision where you're like, do I do the safe thing for less money or the risky thing for more money, but maybe none? That's one of the more fun things about the game, I think, and
Absolutely. Yeah,
will
and
certainly
that's
change.
yes, exactly. Like one of the most important skills in any normal form of poker is just patience, right? You're waiting for the perfect spot, and then when you get the perfect spot, no one wants to give you action. Well, that's never
Yeah.
a problem in OFC because it's I mean, all the things about card drawing probabilities are the same, and also all the meta skills around poker, like table selection or like when to get up or how to handle
Yeah.
tilt. All of those are the same, or maybe
When
more
to get up
important.
is a very important skill in UFC, let me tell you. The
Yes,
game,
and how to.
the game is very high variance, and sometimes you can be sitting there cruising along with a reasonable profit, and it can just all go down the toilet very, very fast.
Exactly, and how to handle tilt is probably the most important skill for OFC because of that variance. Um, and also just because you can run so cold while someone else is running so hot, and you're just like, oh my goodness, they get the one card that's left in the deck,
Yeah.
and that
Oh
happens to
yeah.
everybody all the time.
In fact, of the three players that we're seeing here, and indeed we're seeing all of them now, LW is the only one that I've seen like visibly go on tilt, like tilting off in chat or like emote spamming or whatever. And I don't think that that's going to be a problem here, but like I've definitely seen him do that, and I've definitely seen it affect his play. So LW, if you're listening, keep your cool, man. You're swimming with the sharks, and you're gonna need your wits about you.
I can't tell if I'm some sort of a. Am I like a clownfish or am I like a pufferfish? What type of fish am I?
I
Oh, you're
think.
definitely a pufferfish, right?
Well, I'm not sure which of the two dudes I am, but one of them is definitely like a blowfish, and the other one is like
I don't know what the guy on the right with the cowboy head is. The guy on the left is kind of a Gabe Kaplan, and the guy on the right is kind of like I don't know. Pepito, are you listening? Who would you say the commentator on the right is modeled after? I mean, the games have started, but like obviously this is the important thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I assume that you're the pufferfish because last time when we streamed, only the pufferfish was there. I assume I'm
oh
the
yeah, that's
cowboy
right.
hat.
That's right. That's right. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we have cards
I
in the
do like a
air
martini.
on the
We do
Digima
have
felt.
cards in the air. Um, LW with a pretty nice start going to Fantasyland on turn one.
Yeah, extremely
Um,
strong start unless he decides to take unnecessary risks for no reason, which some occasionally
yeah, I
he's
mean,
done.
there's really oh wow, he even puts up too. Um, there's no um, there's no real reason for him to put
Yeah.
himself in a position to foul. He actually can't even foul now. Like if he rips king queen, he gets trip kings, trip queens, and he just takes cold four to absolute value town. Um, but thankfully, at least from cold four's perspective, that didn't happen. Okay, so now LW is in Fantasyland, which just in case anybody doesn't know what that means, is if you make a legal hand with a pair of queens or better up top, um, on the next hand, you get to draw 14 cards immediately and then just make all your placements after you see what your opponents do. So you basically get the optimal layout in the top 14 cards of the deck, whereas your opponent still has to work on incomplete information. And it's
Yep.
pretty gross.
Yep. And of course, that's a huge advantage, but it still happens that someone who's not in Fantasyland might beat you if they get the perfect draw.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. You can be in Fantasyland and lose money, but generally speaking, you know, in the thinking in OFC involves a lot of like EV calculations. I mean, obviously because it's poker, but Fantasyland, at least in this version of the game, tends to be worth about 10. And so if you are like calculating a percent probability that you get Fantasyland, um, you generally add 10 points to your score in that case because you can expect to score 10. Although that's in the heads up game. In a 3-player game, the EVs are different.
yep. And
Speaking
I
of
would
which, the
also
3-player
say
game has begun.
yes, we now have three players at the table. So just a very short recap if anyone doesn't know the rules of OFC. Basically, the way that it works is you're trying to score points, and then there's a stake for that amount of points. And each of the players will settle with each other one to one. Of course, the app scores it immediately for us. But if you were playing this with physical cards, each pair of players would have to say, "How much do I owe you? How much do I owe you?" Um, and in this game, the point is worth half a dollar, 50 cents. Um, of course, it could be much more, but this is the biggest table for the sharkiest sharks that we have in the fish fry currently. And
Yeah, we might go
so,
bigger. I don't know. It depends.
yeah, it depends
But
on if
yeah,
we can how degen we can convince Pepito we want to go. But
my guesses probably vary. But so just generally in terms of how the points are scored, um, every player has 13 slots for cards in front of them. On first street, you're dealt 5 cards and need to place all 5 cards on your board somewhere. You're making 3 poker hands, a 5-card hand on the bottom, a 5-card hand in the middle, and a 3-card hand on top. In order for your hand to be legal, you need to have the strongest hand on the bottom, the second strongest hand in the middle, and the weakest hand up top. And so as you're dealt cards, you place them out on the board and slowly compose poker hands that you're trying to use to beat your opponents. So we can see here that LW has a king high spade flush on the bottom, and that is likely to beat both his opponents unless BJ can boat up or draw to quads with trip jacks and a 10 on the bottom. And so he'll get, which indeed he does. And so LW's flush on the bottom is worth 4. Bossman's full house on the bottom is worth 6. And there's a table where things are worth more depending on how high up on the board you make them. And we can see Cold 4 mixed pair kings on top, which is worth 8. So just that one pair is worth more than both the flush and the boat combined because it's harder to make made hands on the top.
Yes, absolutely. And that constraint that you always have to have a stronger or at least equal. It's actually legal. You can have equal. Like you could have the same straight on the bottom and the middle, and that would be fine. But that you have to have a strictly stronger hand below for each of the three levels is actually the hardest element of it. Because so like we had talked about before, the original game of OFC without the pineapple version of it, where you only get one card at a time, you basically have to build from the bottom up. You would be crazy in that version to set anything in the top. It's just way too risky. But in this version, where you have that optionality, you get three cards at a time and throw one away and set two. You often have to. You have to gamble a little bit, but a reasonable gamble, knowing what cards are still there. So, of course, in normal versions of poker, whether it's PLO or stud or no limit hold'em, of course,
Hold'em,
um, it's
perhaps.
it's hold'em. I know some people play that game, although it's a little bit rare to find it spread these days. But it's of course very interactive. Whether you have the hand or not, you can tell the right story and get someone to fold. That's of course not an option in OFC. You're going to
Yeah,
get
everybody's
your
gold fishing
cards
in
no matter
OFC.
what. Exactly. And the ways that you interact in OFC are slightly different. So, one very important way, of course, the open face element of OFC is you see what other cards are still available in the deck by looking at your opponent's board or two boards if you're in a three-way game. And so, one element of bluffing is what cards you choose to throw away because that's information they don't get to see. Those four
Yeah,
cards.
you can hide people's outs by mucking them, and they don't get to see that the card's not live anymore.
Exactly. And it might make them take a crazy risk um, if they think that the card is far more live than it really is. That doesn't matter that much until the end of the hand typically, but it can matter. So that's one way that you interact. Um, and then the other way that you interact is the way that the scoring mechanism works. So Bakadora was talking about a second ago how there's different points for the different poker hands that you make. There's one more way that you get points, which is for each row that you have a stronger hand than your opponent. You compare each row, you get 1 point, and if you win all three, you get an additional 3 points. So right there, you saw -6, and that's because LW and Bossman both fouled. They both had a hand that was illegal, and so cold bet, no matter what cold bet had placed, was going to get at least 6 points, and then whatever additional royalties for the hands that they make. So often, it's very important to not get scooped where they win all three rows. If they're going to win two rows, then they're just going to get two additional points. But if they scoop you, they get six. So that 4 point difference, that's as important as making a whole flush in the bottom, for example.
Yeah, so you're not just going on the absolute strength of your hand, you're looking at your opponents and seeing what it is that you have to beat, essentially. That's one of the primary ways that you make money in Fantasyland is that you get to say, okay, what do I need to beat my opponent on the bottom so that I can set stronger hands in the middle and the top so that I can scoop them and get the extra money. Um, so I think that's a pretty reasonable overview of like the rules details of the game. And so generally speaking, I think we're going to transition now into commentary on the players' placements as they make them. So in
Yes.
general,
The one thing I'm not sure if we said though is the way you get into Fantasyland is
we did say that.
oh, okay. If
Yeah,
your
a
if
legal
your
hand.
top row is queens or stronger and your hand is legal. So for example, if you get trips up top, that also counts. That's how you get into Fantasyland. If you're in Fantasyland, you can stay there. So occasionally someone will actually stay there multiple times, but it takes a little bit more. You have to get trips up top or quads are better in the bottom. And some variants, if you make a full house in the middle, but not in this particular variant that we're playing right here. Those are the
Yeah,
elements that allow
that's
you to
busted.
stay.
That's pretty easy to do. In So generally speaking, yeah, I mean, people definitely do combo off and stay in Fantasyland for multiple hands, but generally speaking, you don't expect to do that. And everybody at the table rolls their eyes when the person shows off their fantasy land placement and they've got like a royal on the bottom or whatever. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and so strategically speaking, um, your baseline strategic goal should be to get to Fantasyland as often as possible. Fantasyland is where you're going to make most of your money, but over the course of a hand, you will make decisions about whether to go for a riskier high value play versus a safer low value play. There's a number of factors that would cause you to make that decision that we'll be talking about as we discuss the hands. How likely your opponent is to bust being one of them, how likely your opponent is to make fantasy lane being another, how many outs you have, different things like that. But in a scenario like this, where BJ is in fantasy land and LW and Cold 4 are not, they're basically incentivized to floor it no matter what's going on. Because if they make a hand that is not worth very many points or possibly worth 0 points, whatever it is that BJ places is going to scoop them anyway, which is tantamount to them busting. You want to be able to have lots of points in your hand to either beat the placements that they make, which certainly is good for you, but also to have a hand worth points to recoup the points that they'll be taking from you with whatever their God mode placement is. So in this case, we see that LW has busted, so he's going to pay the maximum, whereas Called 4 makes a straight on the bottom, so he's going to pay 2 fewer points to BJ than he otherwise would have to. And look, BJ hits quads, so he gets to go into Fantasyland a second time. So in the early going here, BJ definitely running pretty hot. He's up about, I think he sat with 40. So he's close to doubled up, I think. And that can all change in a heartbeat in OFC because the game is such high variance. But we will see how it goes and how I expect that if any of these players bust, that they will not be leaving immediately. Okay, so that's enough talking about the game. Let's talk through some of the decisions we actually watch these players make. So, go
Sure.
ahead.
So it looks like LW has a gut shot. And while a gut shot in No Limit Hold'em isn't very good at all, gut shot in open face, where none of the card that's important for him, for example, it's the 5, have been shown yet, is actually pretty strong, because you have basically all cards
Yeah,
except for one will be dealt by the end. So you basically get a third of the deck. Um, each player will get 1/3 of the deck. So he would need to miss all 4 of the 5s that are in the deck, which is pretty unlikely. It's about an 82% chance, I think, but I could pull up my calculator and find out for sure.
a gut shot on First Street with no blockers visible completes a little less than 75% of the time. He made it on Second Street, and there were still no blockers visible, which is a little more than 60. So he was a reasonable favorite to hit that gut shot. Indeed, he did. Oh, he goes bust and he bounces. I wonder if he'll be back. But as of right now, we're sitting in a 2-player game with BJ having more or less completely gotten the best of LW. Bummer for him. Okay, so Cold 4 is in Fantasyland. So BJ is incentivized to floor it here and is tanking a reasonable amount on this first placement. Okay.
And as I think you had described last time that you streamed, technically it's part of the same hand when someone goes to Fantasyland. So this is really the same hand. If instead of bouncing, if LW had decided to rebuy, he wouldn't actually be part of this hand. It's basically Cold Bet's turn to punish Bossman 1-on-1,
All right,
and
here
he
he is.
makes
He's
it.
back.
Wow.
What a champion. LW back in the fray. Um, Yeah, the other consequence of Fantasyland technically being the same hand as the previous hand is that if someone like royals you in Fantasylands again, you can't actually leave. You have to wait for them to do it to you again. And so that is oftentimes if you combo off in Fantasyland, uh, you'll often see the person leave the first chance they get because they're like, oh my god, I'm sick of this. Okay, so let's start. Let's talk about some of these opening placements. Um, Logan started a pair of sixes with an 8, a 7, and an ace. He is signaling that his goal for making Fantasyland when he makes the placement that he made is to pair the ace in the middle and use that to support a big pair up top, gunning for something like 2 pair on the bottom with the 8s and the 6s.
He held on to the bat really
That would be in contrast to if he was going to try to make 2 pair in the middle with the ace on top, because if you have the ace in the middle and you pair a non-ace card, your 2 pair will always beat any 2 pair you make on the bottom. So you need to like make a straight or a flush or trips or something better than 2 pair if you want to be able to pair an ace in the middle,
Yep.
along with
Very
some random other
interesting.
thing.
Very interesting play just happened from Cold Bet, where he had started out basically 3 to a flush in the bottom, and on this last street he kind of bailed on that and put an ace in the bottom because the ace came. Um, Personally, I probably would have put the ace up top. So queens up top, of course, is the standard way people normally get into Fantasyland, but you can get there with kings or even aces up top. So when he got that ace in the last pull, we know where 3 of the aces are. It's not super likely that another ace will come, but it's still a possibility. And so
So
I wouldn't have given up on the
did that
flush
for
so early.
I think he did that for 2 reasons. One, he saw a lot of diamond blockers. There were 3 diamonds on LW's board and 1 on BJ's board, which is not a huge amount, but definitely like enough to be concerned. Secondly, we see that BJ has drawn out of this now, but BJ led with a pair of queens up top and a king in the middle and 7-3 on the bottom. And so he had a lot of work to do to not foul. And so in that way, Cold 4 probably realized that, hey, if I'm gunning for a straight or nothing on the or a flush or nothing on the bottom, then I'm likely to foul. But I'm looking at this other guy at the table right now whose hand is going to need to draw like a very specific combination of cards to not foul. So I'll save some money and indeed be profitable if he busts and I don't, which is exactly what happened. BJ managed to pair the king in the middle last time to support the queens up top, but he was unable to construct 2 pair on the bottom and fouled his hand, which meant that he had to pay Cold 4, whose hand ended up being worth nothing. And so even with a 0-point hand, he was profitable.
And we have some interesting sets here. The beginning, how you set your hand in the beginning really kind of either locks you into things or keeps your opportunities open throughout the whole hand. In case you have to.
It's the most important decision in a game of OFC. It's your opening 5.
And it's also the part that's not yet really solved. So there are solvers out there. There's neural net solvers and all sorts of machine learning, and it's pretty knowable when you get 3 cards what the best possible of the options are. There's really not that many options, especially towards the middle and into the hand. But the beginning, where you put those 5 cards, that's still something that even the best solvers don't completely understand yet about this game.
Right. So I think the most notable thing that we saw on First Street here is that Logan chose not, or LW chose not to put the king on top. Generally speaking, you want to, if you draw a naked fantasy card in your opening hand, you want to put it on top. But he chose to play king 10-10 on the bottom instead of 10-10 on the bottom, 8-3 in the middle, and the king on top. And I'm curious why he did that. There was 1 king blocker visible, but 1 blocker on First Street doesn't really mean a lot.
I think there were actually 2. I think each of them had a king. Bossman had a king in the middle, and
Oh, was that visible on the First Street?
yes, but to me, the making sure I have a bottom hand that's legal. I don't want to fill it up with things that I think are dead. I want to
Yeah.
have the opportunity yeah, there's one king left, of course.
Exactly.
I'd like to have the opportunity, if that king comes, I can put it in the top and make a pair. But if it doesn't, then it's not holding me back, so to speak. So it kind of
Yeah.
was an odd placement to put in the bottom in the first placement.
You tend to have, so if you go for like the bog standard way to get to Fantasyland, which is either two pair, big pair on top, or two pair, bigger pair, big pair on top, you tend to have one junky slot on the top and the bottom, and then one or two junky slots in the middle. And so sometimes you'll see someone stash like a 3 or some other random garbage card in the top row, or make a placement where it doesn't seem to otherwise make sense. And that's because they planning on just not using it in the ultimate hand they make. Okay, so BJ under the gun here. Let's see how he starts. Okay, pair of 4s on the bottom, 8, 5 in the middle, and an ace on top. That is pretty interesting. I think I agree with the ace on top. I think if it was me, I probably would have switched the position of the 8, 5, and the 4s. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was gonna say typically if I get a real small pair, I almost always put it in the middle just because it's so easy to make two pair on the bottom, unless I have cards that have additional synergy somehow, like 3 to a flush or something like that. Yeah, I
Right.
probably would have
I
put the
might
force
I
in the
might
middle.
have I might have even gone 8 on the bottom, 4s with the 5 in the middle, just because the 8 and the 5 are kind of clunky with each other. Like they can be used in a straight, but like you need to draw the two cards in the middle for that to ever happen. And because they're not suited, they wouldn't have had flush potential. And neither of those things is really very important when you start them in the middle, because like making a straight or a flush in the middle is pretty comparatively rare. But for your bottom cards, um, if they're randomly unsuited or randomly disconnected, you can end up boxing yourself into a corner when pairs don't come, because oftentimes drawing to like straight outs or flush outs can be your only way to construct a legal hand.
Yep, but it looks like it worked out for Boss Man. So he pulled last time. He pulled the 4 to make trip 4s in the bottom, and he made a second pair in the middle. So he was all set up. And then this pull he completed with the ace up top. So it looks like he's going to Fantasyland for sure, and he might also either get to quads or a full house here. So we'll see. It looks like it worked out for him. Full house.
You
There you
like
go.
trying to go to a fantasy land of another kind, just like sitting there with like naked four flush in both rows, and oh, he gets the middle but bricks the bottom. There were so many clubs in the field that was such an unlikely hit for the flush. If he got it, it would have been amazing, but sadly that did not go. Ooh, and Cold Four gets there as well. All right, so LW takes it on the chin here.
Yep. It's a lot harder when you're playing and your opponents are in Fantasyland because you don't get any information, so you can't count outs or anything.
Exactly. Yeah, most of the deck is just invisible. And he's got a bit of a stumper on this opening placement here. Okay, so two flush on the bottom with the ace on top. Ace on top is obviously correct for the Fantasyland potential. Whether the 8-6 goes on the bottom or in the middle is pretty marginal. I think I am comfortable with starting with the two flush. Okay, making
So
some progress here.
yep, but he needs to get the 4, or he needs to. Yep. So I personally, when I don't have the additional information, I don't like the 5 card hands as much. So like trying
Straights
to
and
make.
flushes and whatever.
Right. If I had 3 to a flush, I do think I would put it in the bottom. But when I only have 2 to the flush, there's too much uncertainty. So, like you
Yeah.
were saying before, it's highly likely that you can make two pair something up top, right? Or at least that allows you to make something up top. Whether you get the thing or not is, of course, luck of the draw. But to build the hand up so that you can support a big pair up top, it's pretty likely you'll be able to go two pair. it's less likely you'll be able to go a flush or a straight unless you start out halfway there, so to speak. So
Right.
the 8-6 has some synergy for straight as well, but I don't know the jack. I know we're talking about the last hand still, but the jack was the one that kind of threw me for a loop. I might have gone jack 8, 6 4, and then ace up top. Or it also wouldn't have been terribly wrong to put the ace in the middle and try to go 2 pair on the bottom, aces in the middle, big pair up top, kings or queens up top. But I don't like that as much as well when I can't see how many of the aces are left. So yeah,
Okay, so for this new hand here, pretty uncontroversial opening placements for all the players. LW gets to start with a pair on the bottom, and Cold 4 and BJ are trying to make a single fat pair in the middle.
there's only one queen left in the deck, so only one of them can go to Fantasyland unless they start putting other large cards in the top as well.
Yeah, very curious to see who gets that. Certainly, if someone gets a queen, they will not be burying it. Um,
And also,
so
we know where 3 of the kings are, so we can't put kings up top. There's 2 aces still to be found. So Cold 4-bet very well could complete the middle ace pair, which looks like what he's working on. It's all a question of
no,
can
he gets the threes and deuces, so he backdoors his way into not needing the ace. That's very nice. LW's completed his 2 pair on the bottom, and BJ peels the case ace and with nothing to do with it. That's gotta be
Or
upsetting for both the
I
other
think there's
players.
one ace. I think there's still one ace left out there, right?
Oh, it's okay, right. I'm sorry. The client tricked me. It flashed the ace when the new card came on top, but that wasn't the actual card that was placed there.
Yeah.
My
So
bad, my bad.
Boss Man could get aces up top, but he would have to do some magic. He'd have to get trip nines so that his bottom was stronger than a 2 pair in the middle or something.
No
It
trips
doesn't look
nines.
very.
LW's got the other
Oh,
two
you're
in
right.
his boat.
You're right about that too. It's very very unlikely Bossman's going to Fantasyland, but he can still make a strong hand and potentially. Uh, he doesn't want to get um, scooped here, but it's looking increasingly likely unless he can find a 10.
He's got it. Yeah, he's got to rip that last 10. Cold Fort sets it up on 4th Street. Everything's ready for him to go. LW looks like, unless he gets the case jack, he'll just be getting the boat. Oh, and Cold 4 gets the case 10. So BJ had no hope. Sad face BJ. His fast exit cash, I'm sure, must be a reasonable palliative. Okay. So now both these guys are trying to floor it to catch up to Cold 4 in Fantasyland. BJ starts the queens on the bottom. I think that is a reasonable play, generally speaking. A lot of hands can be lost by like opening a fat pair and sticking them on top. But I think that when your opponent is in Fantasyland, you just always do it. I think if I opened a pair of queens and my opponent was in Fantasyland, I would just, you know, charge ahead and put them on top.
Yeah, it's kind of an ugly starting hand, except for the queens, because there's no synergy between the jack, the 6, or the deuce in any way.
And
Very
you don't
hard
even
to.
love putting the queens up top because it's just like you have a lot of work to do to not kill yourself. Um,
Yeah,
and whereas like I would much rather have an opening hand like LW's. And LW's placement was pretty reasonable. You could also put the ace in the middle, but with 2 blocked queens visible on 1st Street, you're probably going to want to try to pair the ace on the top. And indeed, he does that.
yep. And LW's looking pretty strong. He just has to
LW's looking very strong.
complete a
Just
few
needs
more
to,
pairs, but at this street, that looks really good.
yeah, I would say he's above 50% to make Fantasyland at this stage. Um, whereas like BJ has drawn a fair bit of trash and needs to like still needs to fix both bottom rows and then rip like kings or whatever. Oh man,
Oh
the trip
man,
deuces in the
that's
middle, that is
yes,
almost certainly would kill him.
that's a very questionable play in my opinion because you basically have trapped yourself. You have to get another queen or you're dead. So like I like two pair in the middle. I hate trips in the middle unless I've already made something stronger than trips on the bottom. Or if I'm drawing to something that's very likely. Like if I'm forward to a flush and I
Well,
look and I have a bunch of outs to
so
that flush.
well, we're talking about how we hate that play. It's very possible that that was the only placement that he could have made that kept any outs live to Fantasyland at all. So like not seeing the cards that he used to make that decision, I don't think we can say that that was like that was obviously a play that would lead to him busting a large percentage of the time, but that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that it was wrong. You see, so look. So he had a pair of deuce, like his third card in the muck was deuce. That means he had two deuces showing there, and so he needed to either pollute his top row with a second junk card, meaning that he couldn't get to Fantasyland, um, or um, he had to stick a zero outer on the bottom to um, basically like necessitate him, I think, drawing the case queen anyway. And so I think the deuce in the middle was actually the least worst option there, surprisingly enough. And so generally speaking, especially since we're playing without um, visibility into the cards that the players are choosing to muck, um, I'm going to kind of shy away from like saying like, oh, I wouldn't have made this play because really, in a certain sense, we don't really know. Um, the only thing that we're going to have complete information for is the opening five,
Yeah.
and opening five is definitely where a lot of hands are won or lost right away.
Yes, that's a good point. And also the players have a little bit more information as well because they know what they threw out. So by the
Exactly.
time that we get to the last street, they've already thrown out three cards, and those might be the relevant cards to get into Fantasyland. So we might think something's live that really they know is dead, and that's why they went a
Mhm.
different direction as well.
LW
LW
looking
working
pretty
on
medium on these flushes. Fair few blockers to each of them, but he's got some. Okay, so no, he abandons flush in the middle, which I think is a good play. Pairs the six instead.
yep.
So now he's hoping to peel a club and then another random 9, 7, or 6 in the
But he
middle,
only
of which
has
there are.
three outs for the middle. He only
Yeah,
has three outs
very.
for the middle, and one of those outs also was a club. So yeah, it
Yeah.
didn't. It the club looked pretty likely to come. He got pretty unlucky on a hand 2 hands ago, by the way, where if you counted his outs, he had like 8 outs to get there. He was trying to make a two pair, and none of them came, which happens sometimes as well. It's but he looked extremely live going into last street 2 hands ago. This hand, he did not look so live going into the last street.
All right,
All
well, he's
right,
in
check.
position. He's in position now, so let's see if he can convert. Pretty reasonable start for cold four. Deuces on the bottom with the jack. Um, Pretty reasonable
I,
for BJ as well. Ace with the
I also
king.
would have liked deuces in the middle for the same reason that we talked about before. Having small pairs in the middle, you never want to have bigger pairs in the middle and then be trying to get to a trips or something in the bottom.
It's true, but with a card that is so much higher in rank, like a kicker that's so much higher in rank on the bottom than the two singletons you have in the middle. You have a lot of wiggle room for the cards that go in the middle to be smaller than that jack. And so, given that you're like reasonably likely to pair the jack, um, when you have um, when you have like a very, very small pair that can sort of be shielded by a high kicker that way, that distinction is a little bit less important. And so then you start to think about like the marginal increased likelihood of like boating up on the bottom, for example, by starting with the pair. And so that's certainly a very thin value decision in any case, because
Yep.
the likely course of action is going to still be two pair, fatties up top.
Bossman and LW both looking for a 5. LW to make a pair in the middle. Oh, and Bossman got a 5 to complete his straight. So, by the way, that's one thing that I often do for myself. Often you'll have 2 cards. You're trying to make a few more pairs, like 2 pair in the middle or something, and you need to set a card that looks live, but there's multiple cards that are equally live. One way that I often break that tie is I look at the other people's boards and I go, if they had gotten this card, would they have thrown it away? So in this case that we just saw with
Right.
Bossman and LW putting the 5 in the middle is a really good move if he had something else that was equally live, i.e., three of them are left after he puts it. Because he knows that if Bossman ever gets a 5, he would throw it in there. Uh, he would know if he gets a 5. Basically, is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way.
Indeed. Yeah. So, generally speaking, when you're breaking ties about what cards to play, you're more certain about whether or not the cards that your opponents want are in their muck or not. Because if they would have played it had they drawn it, you can be reasonably confident that it's not in the muck. Whereas if it doesn't necessarily fit into any of the stuff they've got going on their board, it could very plausibly be in their muck. And so you're more certain of the probability of you eventually peeling one if your opponent wants it to. That is a strategy tip courtesy of openfacesolutions.com, which is a mostly defunct website, but has a few strategy articles still left on it. And one of the strategy articles does indeed instruct you to do that.
Interesting. That LW looked pretty live there, but
He did. That was a bummer. Oh, and called for with the emote for the rub-ins.
I mean that's half the game, right? Try
What
to
a
make your
cool
opponent
guy.
tilt.
What a cool guy with cool goals in life.
Interesting setting here with the kings on the
Yeah,
bottom.
I would have reversed the kings and the 5-4 in BJ's shoes. Oh man. Logan, I'm not trying to hate on you, but oh, was it thrown at you? I'm sorry, bro.
Yeah, almost the same.
Obviously the digs were facetious.
Almost the
But
same situation here with LW, both Bossman and LW. I would have put the big pair in the middle because then you already have the middle known. You just have to make something
yeah,
stronger than one pair in the bottom, right? Which is very possible. And
yeah,
then you're already set up to receive a queen and go to Fantasyland. So I both of their hands, I would have started with the aces or the kings in the middle.
yeah. So with kings, it's a little trickier. Sometimes it can be correct to do kings on the top, but or sometimes even the bottom. But generally speaking, for your opening placement, just about 100% of the time, aces go in the middle. And as near as 100%, kings in the middle is also good. If you're like in position and a bunch of queens are gone, and like you think it's unlikely that you'll be able to make a pair of queens up top of Fantasyland, you can start the kings on top. Similarly, if you're in position and you see your opponents make like 2 really risky plays, they start like queens on top, aces on top, or something insane like that. Then kings on the bottom can be reasonable just because you're going to make money by not busting.
And LW gets that last queen. There was the same similar situation where all three of them had a queen up
Yeah.
top. Well, Bossman's all set up to put something up top, but there's no more cards that can help him get into Fantasyland, unfortunately. So he's just
And
gonna hope for a big
ironically,
pair.
BJ and LW both they're sort of thumbing their noses at us by starting the big pairs on the bottom and then like being rewarded for doing so.
Yeah, of course.
BJ voting up and LW making trips, maybe even voting up himself. Oh, quads! Oh, look at
Of
you
course.
guys, fucking styling on these dorks, telling everybody how to
Yeah.
play. $20 for LW. Get fucked, nerds.
Yeah. That's what listening to the math will get you. Nowhere.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's the thing. An open face, like almost every card except for one in the whole deck will eventually make it out onto the felt somewhere,
it's true.
or thrown away. So, like, quads are a lot more common than you might initially assume. Full house.
That's why it's only worth 10. Quads on the bottom being worth 10. Like, when I first started playing the game, I was like, quads is only 10, really? And it's like, no, quads happens all the time.
Right.
It's
Quads is just slightly better than full house in this. So the points on the
we're playing like 13 card PLO, and it's like, oh look, I made quads. It's like, of course you did. Um, okay, so placement. Interesting placement in the opener for Cold 4. We were just talking about an naked ace in the middle being reasonable starting placement, but he chose to start the ace high 3 flush on the bottom. And I think he did that by virtue of, well, why do you think he did that? Especially with the king on the top, I would have been tempted to put the ace in the middle. I guess maybe it's because his other two cards were like two weenies to a flush, so that like by themselves they weren't really getting any extra value. They were just like random cards to pair. Whereas the flush on the bottom would maybe like be reasonable ammo for not getting scooped by the Fantasyland opponent. I wonder if that's like some super pro strat that I'm not aware of.
Oh, he could have made a straight flush, but he made a straight, but strong enough.
Yeah. Foregoing
But
making a flush to draw to a straight flush is like my favorite thing to do. See, it is like it's correct to do like enough times that it just makes me feel good to decide to do it. And when you get there, oh my god, it's just the most fun thing in the world.
yeah, so it's like you're saying, it is worth it most of the time to do it, unless you can see certain things on the board already.
Yeah,
Because
it's a decision based on blockers and how many cards are left to come.
yes, you normally have all the outs to the straight as well. So
Yeah.
like in this case, if there were probably multiple sevens out there, and so whether he got a heart or if he got a seven, he had a lot of outs to make the back row strong enough. And of course, the difference in points is huge. If you get a straight flush, that's 15 points in the back row, and if you get just a normal flush, it's 4. So that's more than a lot of entire hands. 11-point difference is huge.
Yeah, the implicit value of not getting scooped as well. Okay, so BJ opening on the gut shot, 75% chance to peel a 10 with no blockers visible.
So Cold Bet also is working on a gut shot. I don't think he's trying to do 2-pair with the small cards. So he was wanting a 4, but 2 of the 4s just got taken by LW.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And there's the third 4. Very interesting. We haven't seen any 10s yet, so Bossman actually seems pretty live.
Yeah, Bossman is definitely greater than 50% to hit that gut shot now. Looks like Cold 4 is trying to backdoor his way into just like ace on the bottom, whatever in the middle, like higher than bad cards on top. Or I mean, he could. He has the one outer to the wheel. LW having the best layout on the board so far, I think. Still no 10 for BJ. Both of his opponents could plausibly muck a 10, so he's got to like not be loving that. But the deck's getting pretty small, so there's probably 2 10s at minimum still in there.
Yeah. Well, even if BJ gets the 10, his middle is
Yeah,
probably
his middle's. Yeah, he's definitely sweating on the middle.
So 2 aces are already known where they are, so he can't really be hoping to get the last 2 aces in the middle. So he has to be shooting for like a 2-pair or a backdoor straight maybe in the middle and make it straight on the bottom.
Yeah, he's
But
blocking his own 7, and Cold Force got 1, and Cold Force got a 5. 2 5s now. There's the 10. All right, so
yeah,
now he's got to go. I mean, run a runner isn't really the right term, but he's got to hit 2
yeah.
outs on this
So
final draw for 3.
and he's got to go 6-8 to make a straight, or he's got to make 2 pair. Now the sixes are completely live. We haven't seen any
6s
sixes
are
yet.
completely live.
There's 2 8s on the board. Yeah, there's 2 8s on the board. So he has to get an 8 and a 6, which is possible but not likely. He also has
Logan
3.
gets there.
Yep. No dice
Ooh,
for Bossman. So
no dice for BOSSMAN.
for cold bet giving up and putting the 5s in the back, still he gets complete scoop on Bossman.
Yeah.
So it's worth it to take the lower risk route.
You got a quad up for the Rubbins? Okay, no. All right. And by quad, I of course meant boat, obviously. But he was even live for boat, which boat aces up top would just be like the most disgusting thing. He's recouped his entire second bullet. He uh, lost his. He sat down with 40, lost it, and then came back with 50, which he then got down pretty close to 0. But he's taking it more or less entirely from BJ. BJ was sitting around 100 before, and Cold 4 was sitting pretty similar. So if I was Logan, I'd definitely be feeling good about my ascent. Um, Sitting here in Fantasyland, having bought back my entire second bullet. And if I was in BJ's shoes, I would be really loving life with these trips on the bottom and the queen on top.
Both of both for cold bet and Bossman are fighting over 5 3s.
Yeah. Well, that's them keying on each other's outs. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. So queens pair out for BJ, and Cold 4 rips the aces, so now he abandons the 5 and the 3. Quads for BJ. Oh, come on, don't foul the quads, bro.
So he's got 3 outs or to pull a random pair. And it's very hard to know how many pairs are out there because LW's in Fantasyland, so you can't really calculate.
There's certainly some cards we haven't seen any of, so there's a bunch of combos. Oh my god, they both blow it. Boo.
That's gonna help
Ew.
LW get right back.
Ew, foul the quads. Oh god, that sucks. That's what makes me chill. When I'm playing and I have like quads or a sick boat or maybe even a straight flush and I foul it, I'm like, oh my god, why do I do this to myself?
Yep, but that's the game. That happens to everyone. Where the deck keeps sending you what you don't need anymore. It won't send you what you need in the middle.
Yeah. So LW sitting here like deep in the tank, so he either has something great or something kind of crappy. Kind of medium, but he gets the double scoop, so he's feeling good about that. Pepito tells us that we've got about 10 minutes left in our original time limit, but that if we want to keep going, that's cool. I can keep going. I'm having fun.
Yeah,
And
I'll keep going for a bit too.
yeah.
LW in the tank about how to set this initial hand. I think that's reasonable.
I
So
think that's reasonable too. That's definitely a pretty sucky opening hand, but putting the 6 on the bottom would box you into a really awkward straight. And so, like, wheelies in the middle is pretty uncontroversial. Then putting the 6 there too, I think is fine.
yeah, I typically don't love having more cards in the middle than on the bottom if there are no pairs involved in either of those.
That is annoying, but I mean, like, you know,
Yeah,
you got to make the
but
best of that situation.
yeah, I think I would have said it the same way. It's just like you were saying. It's a terrible starting hand to receive.
LW's second street's pretty good. Pairs the 9 and puts the queen on top.
But he's committed to making a straight and therefore implicitly making a full house in the back, which is interesting.
Well, Well, no, I don't think he's committing to the straight. I think he's abandoning Fantasyland is what he's doing.
So what I would have done is thrown I think he got the 3 because I think he started 6-5-2. I would have thrown the 3 in the bottom row as a throwaway card, and still hope for 2 pair in the middle. Because then it leaves you open to get to Fantasyland, even though it's not likely, it still can happen.
BJ hunting for the Case King and gets the Case King, so BJ's going to Fantasyland.
Yeah.
Cold 4 boats up, but settles for their very reasonable pair of jacks on top for just some cash.
But LW makes an even bigger boat, so he's not going to get scooped by anybody.
Nice.
It's pretty important to not get scooped. That's actually a huge element of it. Even if just one row.
It's a very easy way to leak a lot of points over the course of a long game.
Interesting start here to cold 4 bet instead of going 3 to a flush in the back.
I think I agree with his position. Threes I would have maybe done jack on the bottom, 3s in the middle, maybe jack 5 on the bottom, 3s in the middle, but I think that those are all pretty marginal in any case. Especially out of position with the one player in Fantasyland, like you just have no idea how many spades are blocked. The 3 flush is not that attractive to me. Rewarding for the play, so 2 pair locked up on the 2nd street. LW looking okay. Some blockers to his straight on the bottom being visible, but fixes the kings on top. So he's putting the pedal to the metal. We'll see whether he's driving towards a brick wall or towards some open freeway.
The walls are closing in. The 3s are only 1 3 remains. So if he's going to make a straight, he has to probably go up.
Yeah.
And 1 8 is blocked as well. But we have no aces, so getting aces in the middle is still totally possible.
He's in the tank, though. I bet he probably doesn't love this play.
Okay.
That's
well, he's got four outs on the bottom, 3 8s and 1 3.
Yeah. And then just kind of like some trash in the middle that you need to like double hit, which is like sometimes that's just what you got to do.
So I personally hate 3 unpaired cards in the middle.
Yes, it sucks a lot.
I would probably throw something.
Ooh, getting there.
Yeah, it's looking much more possible now.
Not a ton of confidence that the deuce isn't in the muck, but I'm pretty damn sure the queen isn't.
Had 6 outs, and one of the outs just got taken. So he had.
Get there. Run an upswing. Oh, bummer. Okay. Pretty reasonable Fantasyland for BJ. Boat on the bottom, queens on top. Nobody really running away with the game here.
Or at least not anymore. Bossman was a full buy-in.
Bossman was up about a buy-in, and then Cold 4 was up quite a bit. But Logan pulled it all back, or LW pulled it all back, and now everybody is pretty close to treading water. LW is down the most.
But I like his starting hand here. That looks pretty nice.
Oh yeah, his starting hand is like the nuts.
We don't see any queens yet either, so
getting close to it.
So LW
a fair few blockers to the stuff he's got on the bottom, which is a bit unfortunate, but on 2nd Street he's got a bunch of options, and no one blocks the king either. So he's like definitely, I'd be feeling very optimistic at this stage. BJ in the tank.
And it's the type of thing also where you like his implicit plan is to try to go for a straight on the but he could pivot and go for two pair or something. So interesting.
Okay.
He gets the
Keeping both
king.
of those two options open, and yeah, fixing the king on top's got to feel pretty good with the aces just sitting there. That means he's got 4 guard slots on his board, so he can break out for a little while and still be live to complete.
So
Or he could just hit the wheel immediately like a legend.
wow. Yeah, I was going to say the straight looks very unlikely because we saw 3 sixes already on the board and 3 aces. So there was only one out no matter which direction he went, and he would have to also get the 3, but he pulled it off like a pro. Ace
Pretty
3,
dope.
perfect. He still would have been
So
very
that
live
is,
for a 2 pair on the back anyway. So his
yeah.
LW's hand was beautiful from the start.
Sadly, he blocks the case ace now, so he can't live the dream of, like, if that ace was a 6, he could draw ace king to have a set of kings on top for 21 points and just like absolutely rip his opponent's nose in it.
Yep, and he's definitely going to get the king because both kings are missing so far. So
For sure. I suppose it's plausible that one of the players could have mucked a king. Doesn't super fit into either player's board. Yeah, one king in the muck there. Okay, cold 4 up against it now. A lot of pressure on with the 2 players in Fantasyland, but I'm pretty sure he can handle it. He's like the OFC, OMC, just has the nuts all the time. That's not true at all. You're not an OMC. You're like a sick aggro player. I just want to say OFC, OMC.
well, there's the Joker variant of OFC is what
Oh
really
God.
rewards the aggro players. Like there's almost no
Yeah.
point to not try to go for aces up top or
Yeah,
better
I
in that
hate that
variant.
Joker shit. Oh my God, I hate that Joker shit. I was watching some $5 a point OFC with Jokers in High Society, one of the union clubs, and oh my God, it was just a goddamn slot machine. Like it was just the most
Yeah.
degenerate thing I've ever seen in my life. People sitting down with like $1,500 and Fantasyland chains lasting so long that they can't even get up until they lose it all. It's
Yes,
just like,
that's the
why would you
annoying
do that
thing.
to yourself?
That's the annoying thing. You're expected to do something like 5 to 7 refantasies in that version. So, and if you have 3 players on the table, it's almost never that you can leave because it's everyone's in Fantasyland. But there's actually a lot of skill in getting to Fantasyland, where you choose to put the jokers when you draw them when you're trying to get to Fantasyland. But then once you're in Fantasyland, it is kind of like a slot machine, like you're saying. That's why I think the variant that takes the most skill and actually has a slightly higher variance than regular, which is what we're playing here, is progressive. And the only difference with progressive is how you get into Fantasyland. You can get an extra card, but unlike Joker, where you get the same number of cards each time you refantasy, in progressive, if you go in with aces, you get 2 extra cards. But if you refantasy, you get the normal Fantasyland. So you're almost sure to exit the Fantasyland instead of just staying in there forever. I think that variant takes a lot more skill, just because you can
You're forced to
choose to
make a lot
gamble.
thinner. You're forced to make a lot thinner value calculations for.
Yes, and it also you start to treat the so like queens almost always go up top unless you have a super synergistic hand like 4 to a straight or 4 to a flush or something that you need the queen the bottom for in this variant in regular. Um, but in progressive, queen getting into Fantasyland with queens is actually relatively weak compared to getting in with kings or getting in with aces. So often you treat queens just like you would treat a 10 or a jack or something. So
So
each of the variants.
BJ has. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
BJ has signaled that this is his last hand. He has to go do family stuff. And so GG's BJ. Definitely some good games here. some good placements too. If we've been picking nits about people's opening placements, it's just because we need to find something to talk about. I think that by and large, everybody here is playing quite well, and definitely everybody here is playing way better than when the Fish Fry first started spreading UFC tables. Even me, who was like medium at the game when the OFC tables first showed up, was compared to right now was playing like a giant donkey, and especially LW's been there since the beginning, and has grown quite a lot over the course of the um, Fish Fry OFC saga. And
Yeah,
so,
I was gonna
yeah,
say
congratulations.
similarly. I played Cold Four Bet about a week apart or something, and he just plays a ridiculous number of hours on OFC every week, and I noticed a difference, which is hard to notice a difference in only 1 week, but I was like, wow, like I think everybody at this table has put in a ridiculous number of hours and have gotten a lot better in the last couple of weeks since
Dude,
Fish
you should
Fry
see my
introduced it.
graph. My OFC, like my OFT graph for the Fish Fry, you can pinpoint when BJ and Cold Four joined. They joined the Fish Fry like around the same time, and you can tell pretty much right away when they did because my graph takes a nosedive.
It could also be that the stakes that were available, right? There we used to only have 20-cent stake, and now there's 50-cent stake. So the opening
It's
of
true.
different tables, different games can also have an impact on that type of thing.
All right. Well, let me filter my bankroll manager app to only OFC. Okay, so at my highest profitability at OFC, I was sitting around plus $1,100. Um, and since the Sharks have joined over the course of about, so that was about 30 sessions to get to about $1,100. Um, and 30 more sessions later, I've lost about 500 from my maximum. So I'm up stuck $500 from when the Sharks found the Fish Fry. And so lots of excellent players sitting OFC these days, playing a very fun game and having lots of fun doing it. And also, fuck you guys, I want my money back.
Well, I think that one way so introducing variants that no one's good at, like low in the middle, where the back
You
row
can't
and the
you
top.
can't you can't do low ball on Poker Bros, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
It's not yeah, it's not an option in spreading it. Um, the heads up iPhone app where you play against the computer lets you do low ball, and that's a pretty fun variant. It's a pretty action game, since you're not making pairs in the middle. You're making like a deuce to seven low ball
Yeah.
hand, and so you end up making trips on top a lot more, and other stupid shit like that. And so it's much swingier, but sadly that is not an option with Poker Bros. You have regular OFC, you have Joker OFC, you have progressive OFC, and then you have Jokers plus progressive, which they call Ultimate, in which you go with trips up top. With two Jokers in the deck and with trips up top, you get a 17 card fantasy land. And that's what all the most degenerate high limit tables in the big clubs is double Joker Ultimate OFC. And so, you know, chips on top means you get a 17 card fantasy land to do next go, which means you're
Of
virtually
course.
guaranteed to get trips up top again.
It's
And
the
so it's
most
just like
addictive. It's the most addictive form of the drug. So of course
it's a
that's
pretty
what I want to
goddamn
play.
addictive drug, just regular. So I've got a spoilers for the fish wrap this week. There's an interview with me about OFC, as like the player interview in this week's upcoming fish wrap, and Pepito asked me how long you've been playing and how did you learn about it. And the answer is that I was on vacation in Oakland and Vegas with June and Melissa um, about 2 months ago at this point. And we were driving through Marin County to go to Grayton to go play Hold'em there. And we were just like talking about games. And I was like, hey, June, what's OFC? And June and Melissa were both like, oh my God, here we fucking go. And so they showed me OFC, and I was just like, can we just play this? Like, fuck all this Texas Hold'em. Like, can we go to Vegas and play this instead? Um, I was just like, oh my God, this is just the most fun game. This is just the most fun thing I have ever played.
Yes,
That's
it's
obviously not true, but it's a very, very fun game.
well, it's so much fun, but they rarely spread it. So during WSOP, they spread it. They have so unfortunately, they don't spread it at very low limit.
Yeah.
The lowest limit they offer is $5 a point, so 10 times larger than this game. And we saw in this game you can swing $100. So in $5 a point, if you play for an
Yeah.
hour, you can swing $1,000.
Yeah, you
And
got to sit $2,000, $3,000, I assume, to
yes, yeah. And there's also
fully
people
experience the
that
variance in that game.
there's people that play really crazy, and I mean it's a lot of fun. But there's also people that are just very very good. Um, so I and then the only other place I've ever seen it spread, I've heard that they'll spread it if you ask for it at the win, in the, like the high limit area. And then one time in Bellagio in the high limit where they have like this kind of separate room a little bit up.
Yeah, up the little
They
staircase.
Yeah, so I played um, David Benjamin, the famous Hold'em player. The first time when he was learning how to play OFC at all, I was there playing Hold'em in Bellagio, and I saw they were playing, and I asked, "Are they playing OFC?" And he's like, "Yeah," and they were playing $10 a point. And so I went and I sat and played with him because he's obviously an amazing player, but it was the first time he was learning. They were playing the low ball variant in the middle, and I ran the worst I've ever run in my life, like unbelievably bad. And I got felted, even though he was playing well, but he was also making some mistakes. That if you haven't played the game for thousands of hands, you're like low ball. It's really easy to make um, certain mistakes, and I couldn't believe it because I ran so bad, but it was still a cool experience. But those are the only places I've ever seen it spread in
I,
live. And the problem with live,
Joey said that someone she knows got them to spread it at the Aria for $10 a point.
oh, that's
And
nice.
I could,
I've never
yeah,
seen it at the Aria. Oh wait, what's the in the limit side of in LA, at the not the bike but the commerce.
Commerce.
They have like half the tables are limit area,
Yeah,
and in that area sometimes I've seen them spread it, but it's rarer. So the Joker, or sorry, the dealer, it's only worth it to them if they can. So typically those games they do time, so they get less
yeah,
rake because there's only 3 players instead of a full table. So they typically don't like to spread it unless the players are willing to do like a slightly higher rake, which most
yeah.
of the players are, because you're going to swing so much, it's worth it in this game. Like the variance will overpower whatever the rake is, probably, unless you sit there for hours and hours.
With a timed right game, yeah. Um, the the percentage of the pot rate, the way online games do it, can really get you over the course of a long session. But
Yeah,
for a time game, yeah, the time, I mean, shit, it could be $20 a half hour if you're paying $5 a point, $10 a point, and you like wouldn't even feel it.
yeah,
So Jambalaya has sat down and says, "I barely know the rules," and unfortunately, bro, you just like basically walked onto the set of Jaws and been like, "Hey, like, can I like swim? I like don't know what everybody's freaking out about, but like, there's an ocean here. Can I swim in it?" And of course you can. But if I were you, unfortunately, I'd be kissing that $34 to buy. And indeed, half of it is already gone. Um, but yeah, it's a great game. But if you don't know the rules, maybe the 50-cent table is not the place to start. Um, I think
Yeah,
it's very plausible that that $18 goes away basically right now.
it can be a dangerous game, but
Oh my god,
hopefully
it's such a
beginners.
dangerous game.
I was gonna say hopefully beginners luck lets them get trip threes up top or something.
That'd be pretty funny. Um, so tell me,
Reasonable. Good setup.
tell me about the. Oh man, he's live for it too. Hang on, small talk comes later. Chip threes on
Just
top. Come
1-3
on,
off.
do it.
Oh wow.
Oh shit! Oh fuck.
Oh my
Anyway,
goodness.
um,
They both
so
re-fantasied.
they did. That's fucked up. Uh, so tell me about the player pool when they spread it at the WSOP. So like
Yeah.
you made mention before of solvers. I imagine that there are probably like the OFC equivalent of Euro wizards that are probably also just the same Euro wizards that are Euro wizarding it up at the holding tables.
Yeah,
But
pretty much.
are there like OFC whales that just like sit down with like fat sacks and just be like, sure, I'll do whatever the fuck this nerd thing is.
Yes.
Like
To a degree
there,
that was
so there are
unbelievable.
really
To
no
to the, to
kidding.
a degree that was unbelievable to me. So like I said, the smallest stakes, and now this was 3 or 4 years ago, and then it's been similar but not exactly the same in years since then. And I didn't go last year, or I guess no one went last year. Last year was COVID. But um, yeah, so the smallest stake is $5 a point.
Yeah.
I would play $5 and $10, and I didn't ever touch $20. But they also had $50 and they had $100 a point. And the $100 a point, often they're not playing regular; they're playing some juiced up version. I don't know if they're playing Joker, but you can imagine where in a normal game you could swing 200 points, and some of the juiced up versions, whether it's progressive ultimate, low in the middle, also is a little bit more intense. I think someone pointed out that with low in the middle you can be in Fantasyland and foul, but
Yeah,
also
you
you get
can.
trips up top so much more often because all you have to do is make a
Yeah, you
flush
do.
in the back, and then you're ready to make trips up top and have it be a legal hand. So, and especially when you're in Fantasyland, you can make really strong hands, or you can completely foul and have no option even. So low
Tell me
ball
about the
is
whale.
it's a high variance game. But I guess what I was trying to say is in regular, if you sat and played for an hour, you might swing 200 points. And so if a point is $100, that's what 20K, you know. Um, but in some of these high variance versions, you could have way more than that. Like you could swing 500 points or something. So there were people who sat there and played for the whole night and would be up or down six figures, which was ridiculous, crazy to me. And occasionally
So,
someone would sit down and not. They just like there are some whales that come to the. There are some people that will go and play the main event and enter $10,000, and they're not like a super serious poker player, which is crazy.
oh yeah, I mean,
Um,
I've experienced a very small amount of like honest to God Vegas VIP behavior, and it truly, as a person with like a normal human being amount of money, it utterly blows my
yeah,
mind that someone
right.
could light money on fire so cavalierly. And so I mean, I imagine that those dudes, like if they're down to play UFC, then they'll just like shovel it in or whatever. But so, what does game selection look like if you're playing OFC and there's Euro wizards in town, and also there's VIPs, and the game is so high variance that um, like so like what are you thinking about? What are you observing when you're like trying to find a juicy OFC table that's being spread at the WSOP?
Yeah. So of course OFC is a lot different than normal poker games because in normal poker games you have 8 to 9 people at the table, or sometimes 10, I guess, and you're hoping that there's one or two fish that are going to make wild moves and that you're in the right hand when they make that move. With OFC, you can actually exert a skill advantage way harder. Because think about every decision point, right? So in OFC, you get 5 or 6 streets here, and and not all those streets are exactly the same. Like setting the initial setting is a skill into itself, like we talked about already. And so if you have a skill advantage, the there's obviously high luck and high variance in this game, but you get so many more decision points that you can exert that skill advantage really hard. So it's more
You
about
definitely have a lot of opportunities to blow it if you don't know what you're doing.
yes, yeah. Most of the people I played, I think there was only one person, and they were just messing around at the $5 table. I didn't play anyone who straight up didn't know what they were doing, but I did play people that made consistent mistakes or were mediocre because they were making a specific mistake multiple times. And then there were people
So
that
do
were
you
just
do
very
you do
very
you
good.
stand there and watch the game and like look for someone doing that and then play that one, or like how do you like, because
Yes.
what I mean to say is that like OFC is so high variance that if you just watch a table and you see someone losing money, you're not
Right.
necessarily convinced. Like, so you
Correct.
need to be scrutinizing each individual player's play, right?
Yeah, well, so it's more that you'll see somebody make a mistake that is like a glaring mistake. Like they aren't counting their outs or something like that. They're basically just looking at their cards. Um, and they aren't correctly counting outs. So given a certain decision point, there's one card that's way more live than the other, and they throw that one away, and you're like, whoa, that's a huge sign that uh, they're not thinking through it correctly. Um, but more than anything else, it's I would often play people, and then at the end, um, I mean, a huge skill. There's all these meta skills in poker, right? So you're talking about table selection. There wasn't so many times where I would go and watch a game and be like, I have to get into this game. Partially because people go for hours and hours and hours and they don't
Yeah.
stand up. So often it would be I would play somebody, and if I thought I had a skill edge over them, sometimes it would be extreme, sometimes it would be slight. I would say, "Hey, I enjoyed playing you. Do you have a number?" And text me when you're here again. And they would say, they'd text me. Normally, this would all start around 10 p.m. at night. So when I would move to Vegas in the summers and just play OFC every single day. But I'd wake up at like 9 p.m. and go and play. And the games would start around 10. They'd get good at maybe 11 or midnight, and then we'd play until 5 a.m., 8 a.m., depending on how good the game was. And it was really fun for a couple months there, every summer. And basically, there would be specific people I'd want to play. They would text me and say, "Oh, I'm at the Rio. Do you want to play OFC?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And we would start a table. So it was rare. It would happen about half the time maybe that I would join a game that was already going, and there were also ones where I would see a specific player. There were these Russian players that came over as a team. There was also French players that came over as a team, and they would never sit two of their players at the table at the same time. Like they're not playing together, but they would all comment on each other's play and like help each other get better. And so they'd often be watching, and they wouldn't say it during the hand or anything. Like there was no cheating that I could detect or anything like that. But afterwards, they would say, "Hey, in the third hand, when you set in the middle, that was really foolish," or whatever. So they give each other pointers, and they get better that way. In fact, I was just there playing by myself, but it like unofficially became part of a crew with two or three Texas players that were there. I'm not from Texas. I was Bay Area, but that one of them, he gave me a pointer. I said, "Oh, thank you, I appreciate that." And then I ended up staking him, and it was an interesting thing. So I was like unofficially kind of part of their crew. So there's these groups of people that basically will like help each other out. But the Russian players came over, and they were very very serious about it. Like they were the ones that were playing at $50 a point, which is just mind blowingly huge swings. Um, so that was a very interesting time period. I was also playing a lot of PLO. So I love mixed games. The way that I got into poker was over in Berkeley area. There was a small home game where they would only do mixed games. So this was about the same time when I was learning how to do Hold'em at all. Most people only learn Hold'em, and then it's rare if they branch out once they get bored, and only a tiny percentage of people ever branch out. But when I started learning poker at all, I was learning Stud and Badoogie, Badesi, all these weird variant games, Omaha, High Low, Limit, which is and Limit. A lot of people also assume that Limit is very similar to the non-limit version of the game, but I look at them as almost completely different games. Like it's worth it sometimes to draw, whereas it Anyway,
like, yeah.
oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you. You're away from your microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you not hear me?
You're very quiet for some reason. I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't think anything's different.
Okay, sorry.
Am
Anyway,
I,
what
am
were
I
you
still
asking?
quiet?
You're
No.
quieter than before for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize. Um, I was just commenting that I agree with your statement that the no limit and the limit versions of a game are basically entirely different. Like the more or less the only pro player that I ever hear mention like limit games with Angry Larry is Bart Hansen. Like Cassidy make reference to playing some game for like enormous amounts of money. And he'll frequently talk about how different. I've
Yeah.
never seen like except for those like random old YouTube videos of like Barry Greenstein or whatever. I've never seen anyone in the like modern. I don't Peter says my input is bad.
Yeah, you got really quiet all of a sudden. You're kind of cutting in and out. But
Am I
yeah,
better now?
yes, much better. Yeah. Anyway, like you're
Oh
saying,
shit, I can't hear you anymore.
limit
Hang on.
limit's a lot rarer. Well, uh, hopefully bakadora rejoins here in a second. But all I was saying was that when I got started in poker, I basically was learning many different games instead of just hold'em, and each of the games have overlapping skills. So if you're learning stud or something like that, you're looking at the board, you have to remember what cards got thrown away, and you're also thinking a lot about drawing odds. So stud is similar to OFC in certain ways in that you can count your outs a lot better than you can in hold'em. Hold'em, of course, in a game like five card draw or something, teaches you a lot about betting and sizing and bluffing and things like that. Um, Games like Badoogie and Badesi have to teach you how to truly evaluate hands. And then that carries over to when you're playing a different game that has a different evaluation scheme. Like how much stronger is pocket kings than pocket jacks in Hold'em? That's your evaluation scheme. Like you have an internal mapping of how strong that really is. And when you jump into a completely new game like a Badoogie or Badesi, you can still do the math of what's the probability of something coming, but you have no intuition anymore. So you can't play it by intuition on how strong a certain hand is. You have to really think it through. So by doing many different games at the same time, when I was first learning how to play, that really taught me different aspects. And of course, all those aspects are present in every game. It's just which ones are focused on. And so that's when I found OFC, and I was like, okay, the elements of bluffing, that's really not here. The elements of bet sizing, not here at all. But the elements of drawing and odds are extremely strong here, probably the strongest of any of the poker variants. And also, like seeing like this is the one that's the most um like there probably is a correct answer. Like, given the cards that you get or whatever, there probably is a perfect play. Whereas in Hold'em or something, there's multiple different routes you could go through the same hand, and there are some better. There are some that are obviously better, and some that are obviously worse. But there could be multiple routes that are equally good given the information that you have, and given the information you have on the people. It becomes much more about storytelling. Um, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of
Hello,
rambling
I'm
here,
back.
but
Is my audio so bad?
it was all those different variants of the game that I think each teach you something different. And OFC also teaches you things about even about Hold'em. But OFC I think does OFC is just a better designed game. It gets your dopamine going just so much more. It's perhaps less storytelling, less people manipulation, but it's so much more strategy and so much more risk reward trade off that it really
Bro,
is
can you
worth
hear
it.
me?
Oh yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
sorry, you were just like in the zone there.
Yeah, I was on a monologue. Sorry.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean,
I think OFC as an action-packed game that causes you to think very differently from just about any other form of poker that you're likely to find, at least in terms of like it's like a very pure engagement with the probability and the drawing and the outs. And it's not really polluted in a sense by the things that you were talking about, like bluffing or bet sizing, or other things that are very interesting about, say, Hold'em, but that like when sort of removed from the picture, create this really interestingly pure experience that, for me at least, I find very intoxicating. Very similarly to how I was so infatuated with Mahjong. I'll preempt, like you've done a little bit of your bio, so I'll preempt my fish wrap. I'll preempt my fish wrap interview a little bit by talking about how I came to this sort of like modern gambling environment that we find ourselves in. So my first gambling game that I fell in love with was Rishi Mahjong, Japanese Mahjong, which I got into in the summer of 2018. I just like bought a set and wanted to learn to play Mahjong, and the Japanese version was the kind that I decided to play because it's big in Europe, so there's a lot of English language stuff about the rules and so on. And I just like taught my friends and eventually got obsessed with it. And I made my way to New York City, where there was a small but very dedicated Ricci cash game and like tournament community, largely centered around like Japanese cultural institutions or like organizations of Japanese immigrants that were either like, you know, an old person who moved to America, or like usually two categories were like, you know, a senior citizen who was like a gambler of some kind, or like a young person who was like in New York City working for a Japanese bank or whatever. And they would get together in coffee shops and board game stores and whatever, and they would have like a little Mahjong MTG, or they would have a little cash game or something like that. And I managed to insert myself into that scene, and got quite good at it, to the point where in January of 2020, I had done well enough in this tournament circuit in Midtown Manhattan that I was invited to this championship free roll, where the first prize for the championship was a plane ticket that was donated by United, and I spiked that tournament, and so I won a like, you know, $1,200, $1,500 round trip ticket that I was going to use to go to Japan that summer, but of course the pandemic got in the way. So I fell in love with just like the outs counting and the draw probabilities and the sort of player reading and the other dynamics that pervade the game of Mahjong. And I've played like a fair bit of cash Mahjong throughout my time since then. You know, like won probably like, you know, not a huge amount of money. Mahjong did not play for huge stakes, like probably up something like $1,000 in total over the course of my entire playing of it. But I just absolutely fell in love with everything about the game. And OFC scratches the same itch for me very much. That like just the engagement with like the whole game is what you draw, what you choose to keep, and what you throw away and in what order. And there's like a little bit of player reading, like if you really want to try to like angle shoot or whatever, but by and large, it's just pure odds. And it's just so much fun to me. And OFC it's just a really beautiful game that very much plays in the same space. If they spread Japanese Mahjong in America, in casinos or wherever, for like the amount of money that you could play like 2-5 or 5-10 Richi Mahjong, I would have never played poker. I think it's so much more fun of a game. But sadly, that is not the case in America. And in Japan, the rake in the mahjong parlors is like absurdly intensely high. It's such a cutthroat industry that the margins are just like absolutely razor thin. And so it's more or less impossible to actually make a living as a professional mahjong player just with like the winnings from your playing of the game, the way we conceive of a professional poker player as living off their winnings from the game. If you're a professional mahjong player in Japan, you're like writing books, you're coaching, you're streaming, you're getting sponsorship deals, you're doing esports stuff or whatever, and you probably also still have a day job. Like it's really unfortunately like the dream of like being a professional gambler and having mahjong be like your sole source of income is like really not present in modern Japan, at least not since the Yakuza days. But
Well,
yeah,
maybe the new crypto, all the new crypto casinos, that if you can convince them to run mahjong or something, maybe that'll change that whole scene.
there are websites that you can like extremely web 1.0 websites that kind of remind me of. Have you ever seen TonyBet.com, the like OFC online client from like a decade ago? That looks like absolute garbage.
No, but I had played on Seals with Clubs. They had OFC. I don't know if you know that one. That was a
I did.
crypto.
Oh, I don't know that one. TonyBet was like fiat currency. It sort of was before the whole crypto boom, but it just looked like absolute garbage. It's like a shitty Flash app where like there's some footage of people playing it on YouTube, playing OFC on TonyBet on YouTube, and it just is like the shittiest thing. And there's some real money websites for mahjong that are like very similar to that. And like every once in a while, you'll see a guy streaming mahjong cash games on YouTube on just these like clients that look like they were made in like 1995. But so like what we did when we wanted to play mahjong cash during the pandemic was you just have to drum up your own action. Like you get your friend group together and you play on an online client that doesn't support cash payments, and you keep track of all the results in a spreadsheet, and then you like settle up on Venmo afterwards. And that can be fun because it's your own little friend group of degens, and you're playing with no rake and whatever. But it's really only like you could only ever do it for fun. Like you would really need to have like some friends who were just stone cold whales and did not care about how much they were donking off in order for you to like actually make an amount of money playing mahjong. Doing that would actually change your life. Like if you wanted to like be legitimately profitable as a mahjong player in America, you need to like go find some underground basement, full of smoke and gangsters and say the password and whatever, and
Yeah.
that sort of shit.
Well,
Yeah.
related to that is actually, and also related to OFC, is an idea I realized a couple years ago, which is if you're going to invest your time to get really good at something, at anything, right? You definitely want there to be a skill component. Like no matter how much time you spend on roulette, you're not going to get any better on roulette. So
Yeah.
that's a waste. But you actually don't want it to be purely skill. You want there to be a large variance component, but for it to still be skill based. And the reason for that is no one wants to play chess for money because
Oh yeah.
after a few
100%.
games, it's very clear who's better, right? And yet
Yeah.
with poker, people, I mean, and with Hold'em or anything else, like you said, just because you see somebody losing doesn't mean they're worse. Doesn't mean they're even making mistakes. That's just part of the game. But that's what allows that's what allows fish to exist. Period. And like there aren't fish that will put money up in chess because chess is so clearly a completely skill game. You want there
Yeah.
to be a skill game and a luck game at the same time, and that's what's worth investing time to become good at. Those type of games.
Yeah, in my like I've played board games for just about my whole life, Magic the Gathering or things like that. And before I discovered, that gambling games were fun and that there was a lot of depth to them, I tried to learn Go, the Chinese game with the grid and the stones. And that's just about as close to a zero variance game as you can get. Like the possibility space is so huge that, like, in a practical sense, there's some randomness because at least before the supercomputers, neural networks that could play Go and beat the pants off of humans, there was so much possibility space that, like, one person was going to make a non-optimal move just because you could never calculate what the optimal move actually was. But like that is a game where if you suck and you sit down in front of a player who sucks like 1% less than you, they will beat you every time. And that is just not a fun experience. And I quickly realized that the kinds of games that really speak to me are just like you said, games with a large skill component that also have like a fairly huge amount of randomness in them.
Yeah, and that is both the right type. It's the most fun type of game, like you're saying. It's the type of game where people are willing to put money up consistently, even if they got beat before, because they can remember the times when they had hands where they won. But also, it's the hardest type of game to learn because you can get rewarded for making the wrong decision, and you can get punished for making the right decision. So as you're learning the game, you're going to learn habits that maybe are actually not good. So it's the type of thing where thinking about something in a structured, systematic way really can help you break through where simply doing something and getting rewarded or punished won't. You almost can't learn it that way. You can learn some things and you can learn general principles, but you have to.
You can learn some
Um,
heuristics, but
yeah,
you're not going to fully master the game.
right. Which
Um,
which is in fact why commentating was kind of interesting, but also a little bit hard because there's tons of things that I know, but I don't consciously know. Like my brain knows how I would set it, but I can't articulate to exactly why. It's just over the course of hundreds of thousands of hands, I've developed patterns that so I am thinking, but often it's also habit. So there's a lot of things that my brain knows, but I cannot consciously articulate why it's a better move. Or I'd have to step back and think about it, and then maybe I could come up with a reason. If that makes sense.
that's why I did the hand breakdown on Instagram. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see that one yet.
So in the fish wrap either 1 week or 2 weeks ago, Pepito linked to an Instagram story of mine that I'm pretty sure you can still see. That was a heads up 50-cent match between me and LW, where I just stepped through the two major decision points in my opening 5 placement, where I chose to put a 3 flush on the bottom in response to his Fantasyland open, and then peeling pocket jacks on 2nd Street and needing to decide whether to make strip jacks in the bottom or stick them in the middle to like gun it for a 2 pair, and bank on filling the flush and making Fantasyland some other way. And I went into I made the decisions mostly on instinct at the time when the game was played. I wasn't sitting there with the hypergeometric calculator. Like, I was counting my outs, but I wasn't like, oh, okay, 2 pair on 2nd Street with no blockers. That's going to be about 60% of the time. I didn't know that number on the top of my head right there, but I looked at his board and I was like, okay, I can tell that his hand is going to be large or small, and so that I should push here and not make the safe play. And so in that sense, I backfilled the mathematical justification for here is what my intuition was telling me to do in the OFC hand history that I posted. But in the moment, I was very much acting on instinct. That sort of told me, based on the signals that I was reading, that it was time to push.
Yeah. Yep. anyway, I think it's an excellent game. It's to me, it's the most fun game that there is. Like I almost for a year or two didn't play Hold'em anymore because every opportunity I would instead go and play this. I was mostly only playing online during that time, like during this very start of COVID. There were a couple different clubs, Poker Bros, PP Pro Poker, X Poker, a bunch of different clients that uh, all have different OFC variants, um, and I mean, I love the game and I love all the variants. And like you said, Joker mode probably is too much like a slot machine. I think there's a lot of skill in getting into Fantasyland correctly, putting the jokers, but then once you're in Fantasyland, it's just too much, So I typically stay away from that variant. Um, but yeah, I love it, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. Get I'm probably gonna go get some dinner soon here.
Yeah,
But
that's reasonable. One final question. So, where are they spreading OFC during the WSOP? Like if they're like spreading it on request from some weirdo at the Win or at the Aria under normal circumstances, can you just like walk through the Rio and see OFC tables? Or like
yes,
what is okay?
but they so the years when I was doing it, and of course it might be different every year, they never would start them before 10 p.m. So if you walk through during the day or during the tournaments, you probably wouldn't see them. Because, as I mentioned, they make more money. They being the organization, the WSOP that runs the WSOP, they make more money per dealer having a full 9-person table than a 3-person table. So they're only
Definitely.
going to do it if they have excess dealers, and they typically don't have excess dealers when tournaments are running. So they normally wouldn't start the OFC tables until about 10 p.m. And then they would go all night, and so it almost became part of the OFC culture in that one little area that you don't even bother trying to get them to start it until nighttime, and the really serious players would only show up uh, at the Rio at nighttime because that's what they wanted to play. So I also played some PLO. I really like PLO. And specifically, I also like the high-low variant. I just think there's a lot more. There's a lot of stuff going on. Any time where there's a lot of calculating to the hand going on, and those are the types of games that I tend to like. And so I would often come, if I didn't come at like 10 p.m. to play only OFC, I would come at like 7 p.m. and play 2 or 3 hours of PLO, and then jump into the OFC. But like I mentioned earlier, often there were specific people that I would text and say, hey, I'm at the Rio if you want to play, and then we would custom start a table. The first year that I did it, I realized I was making some mistakes because one of the Russian players came over and was like watching me, and he goes, I want to sit in this game, and like we sat down. So specifically, what I was doing is I hadn't played enough. I had been playing on an app, and I had been crushing a bot, but the bot didn't have very much range, and so I didn't really know. So specifically, what I was doing was I was playing it too safe. I was focusing too much on getting the maximum number of points instead of getting into Fantasyland a high percentage of the time. And so this guy sits down and he does things that to me look insane. He's putting like to me putting like if in your opening hand you had pocket kings and he put those on top, to me that was like a suicide move at the time. And now I'm like, oh, that's perfectly reasonable depending on what else you have and if you think you can support it. And he realized basically that my aggression level in the game, I was doing a good job of almost every hand making a 5-card hand in the back and half the time making a 5-card hand in the middle and making a decent amount of points per hand, but I was rarely getting into Fantasyland because I'd build my hand from the bottom up instead of building my hand from the most probable outcome, like the strongest expected value. I was building my hand bottom and then middle and then top. And so it was rare that I would go to Fantasyland. And so he saw this and he's like, oh, this kid is not being aggressive enough in this game. I think that there's a rock, paper, scissors dynamic here where if you
Definitely, for
are
sure.
if you're too aggressive, you're going to foul too high a percent of the time. right? So like if you're doing absolutely insane things, like if you put trip deuces in your first pull in the top row, you're gonna foul almost certainly.
Yeah.
You need to make 2 5-card hands to support that type of thing. It's insanity. So you're not going to. So if you're too aggressive, you're going to foul too high a percent of the time, and because I'm just talking about regular here, there you can calculate the expected value of a fantasy land. So yes, sometimes you'll get a crazy strong one, you'll get a straight flush or something like that, but you can calculate it, and it's like 10 to 12 points somewhere in there is the expected value of a fantasy land. So there is an optimal risk to be taking. Um, and tuning to get close to that risk is a big part of the skill of this particular variant. Um, so what I'm saying is if you foul more than that, trying to get into fantasy land, you're actually losing value. But the other way that you can lose value, and this is what I was doing, was that I was playing it too safe. And if you play it too safe, you're also losing a huge amount of value. So I was almost never going to fantasy land, and as you pointed out, it's very different in a 2-person game and a 3-person game. And the reason was I had played it on an app where it was not a very aggressive bot, and it was only heads up. So that was the environment which I had trained in before. Sorry,
Was it the ABC OFC iPhone app?
I had seen that one before, but no, it was Pineapple. There's an app that's just called Pineapple. I'm not sure. Anyway, so I had just trained on a bot heads up, and I'd only played one person who wasn't very good before I started dipping my toe into the waters. And at first, I was doing well because the people I was playing against were too aggressive, so they were fouling too high a percent of the time. So I thought, okay, I understand this game. I just need to make reasonably strong hands and let my opponent run against the wall and foul a high percentage of the time, and I was making good amount of money. And that's when I learned this very valuable lesson. This in-boss Russian player came over and was like looking at our table. And he said, "Oh yeah, I want to sit here," and like he waited for someone else to get up, which took a while. And then he sits down and starts doing things that to me look like suicide moves, like putting kings up top first pull and stuff like that. And then he would make the hand. I'm like, how in the world is he just getting insanely lucky? Like, what's going on? And I realized, oh, there is this rock paper scissors going on, where too aggressive gets beaten by too conservative, but appropriately aggressive beats conservative. So there is this rock paper scissors. And now, just because there's rock paper scissors doesn't mean that there's an optimal. There is an optimal risk to be taking. And there is an optimal aggressive level, but there's this rock paper scissors between too high, too low, and just right levels of aggression in this game. So anyway, sorry, I am rambling now, but that was one of the ways where I knew I was making mistakes, and it helped me get a lot better, even though I lost a lot of money that particular night. I think the most money I ever made was playing a low ball game, and it was playing against a French guy who he wasn't he didn't know what he didn't know low ball. He was actually one of the really good players at regular, and he didn't know low ball very well, and we were playing low ball. And then there was another player, I don't remember who it was, but and then he also got a medium unlucky. He would set up hands and that were reasonable, and then he would get a little bit unlucky. It's so easy to miss getting a low at all in the middle when you're playing low ball, and then you can over correct for that and build your low too early when you really could have had a much stronger hand otherwise. But
so
I miss it because I haven't been to the WSOP in 2 years now, I guess.
Well, you certainly make it sound like something that would be pretty fun to do, although I imagine I would probably lose my whole ass if I showed up and played OFC with all these guys. If I'm like upset about losing a few $100 playing 20-cent OFC against these random dudes. Speaking of which, let's check in with these random dudes. So it's been heads up for a little while here. A fair few. Oh, look. Speaking of. Oh, never mind. A fair few hands have gone by since we last checked in with the players here. And there has not been a lot of movement in the points. There's only really been a transfer of maybe $10 or $20 or so from LW over to Cold 4, which to me says that they're probably playing very similarly valuable strategies. That's just sort of like some swing has pulled some money over to Cold 4's direction, but that otherwise LW hasn't been spewing, and neither player's been spewing, and neither player's really been crushing it either. It's probably just like, you know, a lucky fantasy land or two, or like a refantasy or whatever, that moved the needle to the extent that it is right now. I think we're probably going to have to stop the stream relatively soon. I think we both probably need to go get some food, and I think we've probably got some other obligations later in the evening. But this has definitely been very cool. Even if we did stray from the topic at hand for some amount of time. But I mean, hey, what commentary stream ever stays on topic 100% of the time? You definitely were one of the OFC DJs in the fish fry, and based on your little bio here, you're like an even larger DGen and even larger like OFC obsessive than I even suspected you to be, which is like definitely saying something, because like I could tell that you were one of the people that like really liked this game. And so to the extent that I was wary of seeing you across the table before, I think I'm substantially more so now. But I say facetiously, you'll see me in the UFC streets, I'm sure. I like this game too much to ever give it up all the way.
Yes, and same here. It was really fun, and I'm glad to. But I don't think we really strayed off topic that far. Even if we're talking about other games of chance, because there's ideas that carry over across all these games, I think.
Indeed, it's true. But I mean, we certainly could have spent a little bit more time talking about the commentary on the feature match that we're watching. But that's what the next stream is for. So with that, I think it's probably time to bounce. If anybody's stuck around this long, you must be really into UFC, just like we are. So in that case, we're probably already seeing you in the tables, but just in case we're not, we're at the OFC tables all the time. The game is really fun. We're totally addicted to it, and we love every second of it. And you should come in and join us, because the game is high variance enough that who knows, we might even beat our pants off. But with that, I am bakadora, and I am ready to sign off.
Yep, and I'm OmegaRex. This one was fun. Thanks for all the players playing, and bakadora commentating with me. And we'll do it again sometime. Have a good night.
For sure. See ya.